Welcome to the ECE Classroom Podcast with your host, Susie Begin, inspiring early childhood educators every day. Hello and welcome to the ECE Classroom, the podcast where we dive deep into the world of early childhood education, parenting tips, and creative learning strategies. I'm your host, Susie Begin, and today I'm joined by a very special guest, Ramona Mathew from Spokes Autism Services. I'm so excited to have you here today. You bring such incredible insights into this field, and I know that many of our listeners are going to be eager to hear from you. But before we jump into today's topic, could you tell me a little bit about you? What drew you into the field and what inspires you to work with children?
Yes, thank you, Susie. Thanks for having me. So I started in the field of autism and behavior therapy in 2005. Funding was through the provincial government, and we got provincially trained. At the time, there was no college programs, and I immediately fell in love with the field of autism. I think more so with the kids, just their uniqueness and seeing every child so different, and the fact that the science of behavior analysis was actually making a difference. We were able to see changes and progress with kids. So I immediately fell in love with this, and I was like, oh my God, this is what I've been looking for. And from there, I then went on to pursue my master's in applied disability studies with a focus on ABA, and then proceeded to become board certified in 2014. And so I've been practicing in the field since 2005, and my roles have evolved. I've worked as, like I said, a frontline instructor therapist is what they used to call it. It's now supervised behavior therapist. I've worked as a behavior consultant across the GTA in many of the agencies, and as well as a senior behavior therapist, coming back to the field of kind of ABA or IBI, which is more intensive. And then about 6 years ago, when there was a lot of changes to the funding model in Ontario, is when I kind of took a step back and wanted to kind of reevaluate where I wanted to go with my career in general. And so then I decided I love ABA. I love this field, and I couldn't step away from it entirely. And so I decided to maybe etch my own path and start my own company. So we do exclusively home-based. And so we're in the clients' homes all across the GTA, working with kids one-on-one, doing community programs, taking them out into the real world, practicing real-world skills. That's a little bit about me and what I do. I'm also a mom. I should throw that in too, on a personal level, because a lot of my, I think, experience and some of the stuff that I talk about also comes from my own experience as a parent. I have 4 kids. I have 4 boys ranging from 17 to 5. So I kind of see some of the parallels sometimes when parents struggle. I'm like, I get it. Life is busy. And, some things parents tell me, I go, that just sounds like my kids. Like, doesn't sound like necessarily neurodivergent or autism. It sounds like boys sometimes. So, yeah.
Yeah, I have 2 boys, so I can definitely relate to that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, you mentioned you do in-home services. Do you also go into daycares or childcare centers?
Yeah, so we've done that a few times. So it all depends on the collaboration that the daycare is willing to, how open they are to us. But we have gone into a few daycares where, we sometimes will have a room off to the side where we will do some one-on-one with the child. And then we will come in and integrate into maybe circle time or into playground or, wherever the need is. We've worked on dressing, the independent sort of skills in the morning, the dressing, the transitions. We've worked on toileting at daycares. So yeah, it all depends on, we've even been in private schools. It just depends on how open, the other party is.
Okay, great. That's good to know. As you know, in daycare, we implement play-based learning as part of our curriculum. So can you tell me a little bit about how you would use play-based learning to support children with autism, especially when we might notice that they engage in play a little differently? How would you bring play as part of their therapy?
Yeah. So I think the definition of play can be different, right? Play is meant to bring joy. Play is meant to bring excitement. It's meant to draw you in. It's meant to engage you, right? And through that, you can learn. So play for an autistic child can look different, as in, depending on the stage and age that they're at. I have a bit of an ECE background, so if I can remember what my developmental stages are, I did ECE as well. That parallel play, to pretend play, and to cooperative play. Our kids with autism may not be going through those stages in the same sort of linear fashion, but that doesn't mean they're not playing, right? So they might be taking a car, and while their peer might be engaging in pretend play and crashing the cars or driving them down a ramp, and the two of them are engaged in this, the child with autism might be more interested in spinning the wheel. And that's what play could look like for them. And it's not typical, but it's still play. It's still enjoyable for them. So I think even for us in therapy, we do a lot of play-based, especially when we've got the little ones, and we do get some kids that are 2.5 and 3 that are coming into therapy. We're not sitting them at a table. We are doing a lot of play-based learning. And so, commenting fast. I like how it's spinning. I love it's going fast. So just commenting on what they're doing, commenting on what they're seeing, or commenting on, they might be sitting beside a peer looking like they're not engaged, but they might be attending to what's happening beside them. So maybe just commenting on what a peer is doing. Crash, wee, crash, kind of just I think play stops being play when it's forced. And when we teach play and the child's not enjoying it, it's not play, right? So I like to kind of look at it as, is it bringing joy to the child? Because that's what play should be, right? Are we teaching? And I've said this sometimes too, because I have parents who will often ask for play goals. I want my child to play. And I said, they are playing. It just looks different. But I get what you're saying. You want them to play with blocks. You want them to build a tower. You want them to, functionally engage with an activity. And we can teach those skills. It doesn't mean it's going to translate to an enjoyable activity for your child. They'll do it. We can teach a leisure activity. We can teach how to play with blocks. And we can do that by, again, providing social praise, modeling, just building it beside them. And the child might be watching. They might not be making direct eye contact with what you're doing, but they might be observing. And maybe when you step away from it, they might, delayed imitation is a skill that a lot of kids with autism have. And they might watch. And then later on, they might start to do it. Or delayed echolalia, for example, is common among kids with autism, where they might hear that script of what their friends are saying and their peers are saying. And then later on down the line, they might start to script, right? And that's also part of them enjoying play in a way that makes sense for them.
Yeah, we've definitely seen a lot of that. We've seen a lot of where you're right. The play might look a little different.
Yeah.
And maybe sometimes educators might be noticing that, right? Noticing that this group of kids plays this way, this child plays differently. Doesn't mean it's not play, like you said, because as long as it's enjoyable for the child is learning. I really do believe that whatever is enjoyable is where they learn. So as long as they're engaging with materials in whatever way they choose to engage with them, I agree. And, that reminds me when you said about the spinning wheels, I'm a big proponent of looking at schemas in terms of how children play. And, rotation schema, they're just, rotating the wheels rather than dynamic schema, which is making the car drive. So, it's different schemas, just different ways, but it's still learning. And so I'm glad you brought that up, and I'm glad we chat about that. On another topic, a lot of times educators in particular are looking to build independent skills with children with autism, especially because, as you said, even parents are asking, can they learn how to put their coat on, or building any other kind of independence in the early years. How do we gently support children with autism in developing those independent skills? And are there different milestones we should be looking at in terms of building those skills?
Yeah. I think it's first assessing, I always look at it as two things: skill deficit versus performance deficit. So one is first looking at, do they actually have the ability physically to do that task, right? I have clients who have fine motor issues. So, gripping something and pulling the pants up, or, even challenges with getting their arms over their head. So there might be, in some cases, assessing the skill deficit versus the performance deficit. So if it's a skill deficit, depending on how challenging or what the challenges are, you might have to have an occupational therapist involved or a physiotherapist involved to work on certain skills, where it might be grip strength or the ability to get their arms over their head. And so there might be different physical limitations. And the other part, if there's no physical limitations, is okay, they have absolutely no idea how to execute these steps, right? Because again, there's that executive functioning involved, like what goes first, which leg goes in, and there's those pieces. That can be taught using what we call forward and backward chaining. We generally use backward chaining, where the caregiver would assist the child in doing all of the steps and then kind of let them finish the task on their own. So whether that's that last piece where they just kind of pull the pants over their right up to their waist, or if it's a jacket, you kind of help them with the whole thing, and then they just kind of put it on, and then you might do the zipper for them or pull up the last bit of the zipper. So that's a skill depth. And you kind of do that on a daily and then fade back gradually as they get used to the entire process. That's a skill deficit where you would teach that. When it's a performance deficit, and by that I mean motivation, right? The child is like, I can do it, I just don't want to because someone else is going to do it for me. And we see that a lot too. In that case, it's a different approach where you'd have to find a way to motivate them to complete the task. So whether that's a first then, whether that's, creating kind of a step of like, okay, jacket, coat, whatever, snow pants, jacket, whatever the steps are. And maybe they get a check mark. Maybe they get a star for completing each step on that dressing list or that independent task that you want them to complete. So I think it's first assessing what is the concern, motivation, or is it a skill deficit, right? And then they're both kind of approached differently. Even if it's a skill deficit, there's got to be a reinforcer. ABA is all about reinforcement, giving kids. I was just talking to someone, that difference between bribery and reinforcement. We're not bribing them to get dressed in the morning. We're shaping a behavior. We're telling them you're on the right track. This is great. Good job. Because it's hard. It's hard for them to do these things. And because we're trying to teach a new skill, we have to pair that with some sort of a reinforcer, right? Some sort of a tangible and something that means something to them. It's not just get dressed and go outside. Okay, but maybe I didn't want to go outside. Maybe I want to dress and then I can have a favorite toy that I can take outside. So we can't assume that going outside or coming into class is the reinforcer, and sometimes that motivation piece could be impacted by the fact that I actually don't want to go outside, which is why I'm not going to get dressed to go outside because it's cold and I don't like the snow. So even assessing that piece in terms of why aren't they engaging in this task? Right? If it's purely just performance, they can totally get themselves dressed. They just don't want to. And then we're assessing, what are we doing?
Right. Yeah. Let's go further down that motivation because, probably 95% of the time it's a motivation, right? It's not about the skill deficit. It's more about that they're not motivated to do it. So what, you mentioned first then, maybe you can describe a little bit about what that is for those of our listeners who are not aware with that. And then like you mentioned visuals as well. So if you can just go into that in a little bit more detail in terms of how that would motivate the child to do the task.
Yeah. So motivation, reinforcement is all about finding what your child likes, but I always make that distinction between they might like something, but it might not be worth working for. Okay. So for example, my child loves his little silk blanket. He takes it everywhere, but it's not worth working for. Like you ask him to do homework and then you'll get your silk blanket. No, that's not happening. It's not worth it, right? He loves it. And so there's a difference. There's a difference between what your child likes and what they're willing to work for. And it's about finding that thing that they're willing to work for. And it usually involves, maybe reserving something that's a special treat, that's a special toy, that's a special access only when, right? And so if you're trying to teach a specific task or you're trying to, like I said, even just get them to do, transitions are really hard. Getting dressed in the morning is really hard. Okay, we've got this special thing they can have access to a special thing when they do this. So that first then comes into play. So first, and that first needs to be clear. So first get dressed and then the special book, for example, if it's a book or it's the teacher, sitting and snuggling up with the teacher in the corner, like if that's it for 5 minutes, it's first this, then this. So it's a very clear contingency. And the key to that is that follow through. So if this happens, this will happen. Happens consistently, kids will learn. That's how they learn. It's the first, then, it's like, if this, then this. And in that, and I say this to my therapist too, even if it's prompted, even if you needed to get them dressed and help them through that first part, they should still access the then part. They should still access because that's how they make the connection. Because if they never get to the then, they won't understand the contingency. They won't understand the relationship. So in the beginning, you may be prompting way more. You might be just having to get them dressed just so they can contact reinforcement and go, okay, I like this. I like this. And then you systematically fade back prompts. You can reinforce. You can go, wow, look at that. Let's go. First we do this. And then you can go. They understand it now because they've contacted that contingency before. They understand the relationship. And that's a big part of it is having kids just understand that relationship first. The other piece is visual schedules. Now, I've seen visuals being misused a ton of times. I think there's a lot of times it's the assumption that if a visual is present, kids are just going to do it. They're just going to, kids with autism are visual learners. That's something I've heard, and I've heard it thrown around quite a bit. And not all of them are. I think to some degree, we're all visual learners. Like who doesn't do better with pictures than with actual written instructions, right? I mean, imagine IKEA just came with words, IKEA furniture, and no actual visuals, right? Like we all learn better if we had some depictions and descript, along with written words. So to just say that the presence of it is going to automatically evoke a behavior is not true. And I think that's where sometimes visuals fall apart. It's actually teaching that point-to-point correspondence. So look, coat, let's get our coats on. And then you show the picture paired with the action, right? And then there's got to be reinforcement after. Good job, you got your coat on, check. Or a star or something that they're going to get immediately for following a specific step on the chain. Those are individual steps that need to be individually taught and individually paired with reinforcement. And then ultimately you finish all of it and great job. Now we can go do our other things. So first and then, and visuals are not exclusive. You can use them together and you can use others. Some kids do better with clip art. Some kids do better with real pictures. It's all about, I guess, your child's learning and what works for them.
Right. So I really love this conversation because I have a child with autism. Oh. He's 19, almost 19 years old now. So I've been through many years with him. Yeah. And, I've heard it said that rewards are especially important for children with autism. They need, like you said, that reinforcement. But how do you know, like you said, you don't want to always resort to bribery. How do you know how to use rewards effectively without constantly bribing children to do things, like you said, getting to know what they really like? But what kind of rewards can you offer? Like, should you offer food reward? Should you offer, an item reward? Yeah. Or are there some rewards you should stay away from? Build more of that intrinsic reward where they just feel good about it. But how do you navigate that? Because that to me is the difficult part is, yes, we understand they need it, but how? What do we do? Yeah.
So when we talk about reinforcement and that difference between reinforcement and bribery, for example, I'll just start there. So bribery is something is happening, the child's not listening, or they're screaming. They're either doing something you don't want them to be doing, or they're not doing something and you want them to do it and they're not doing it. And now you're going to dangle the carrot. Now you're going to pull out the carrot and go, okay, like if you stop, you can have this. Like you need to stop. Or if you go and clean up, I will give you this. That's bribery. That's dangling the carrot and going, this is what you can get if you do what I ask you to do. Reinforcement, on the other hand, happens after. So while a first then can sound like a bribe where you're like, first do this and then you get this, we've already established that we're going to help them. We're going to make sure they're successful. We're not going to just demand from them, expect them to do it. And if they don't do it, we'll bring out the carrot, right? We are going to ensure that they're successful and they contact reinforcement. When they do, they go, I like that. And so I'm going to do it again because And this is the thing, reinforcement in and of itself is not a thing. I can't tell you that use candy, use gummies, or use this book. It's going to be the magical thing. It's not. It depends on your child. So like, I mean, for us as adults too, right? If someone said, hey, good job. Let's say, my boss says to me, good job. Here's a tea. I got you a tea from Starbucks. I don't even like tea. I don't drink tea. I mean, I appreciate the thought, but I don't drink tea. I want something that I like. So it's individualized to the child. It's individualized, and it does change. It's a bit of a dance because it depends on the time of day, right? So edible reinforcers can be very powerful if the child is hungry and they haven't had a snack, but that same cookie has lost its value after lunch because they're full. They don't care for it anymore. So there's that sort of fluctuation as well. And I think it's important to be in tune with your child. If it worked one day, it doesn't mean it's going to work the next day. So by definition, if you see a change in behavior, if we're seeing that, hey, this child sits up, when it's time to do something, you see a change in their behavior, you see a little pep in their step, you've probably got a good thing in your hand. You've probably got something that they're like, I got this last time. I'm excited because she's going to give me this good thing. So sometimes reinforcers can sustain value. Sometimes they can change. It's about, looking at what they're motivated for in the moment. We often do preference assessments. So sometimes we'll just kind of observe, what are they gravitating towards? What's their day like? Are they tired? Maybe they want something more energetic. And the piece to kind of, the last part you asked about is how does that transition into something more intrinsic? I think the piece there is always pairing yourself with the delivery of reinforcers. Your words, your voice. Love how you put your shoes on. That was amazing. They can still get a tangible reinforcer, whether that's a check mark if they're motivated and they understand that if I get 5 check marks, I get my big prize. But your voice, pairing natural instructions and your voice, like, great job. That pairing eventually turns into, my words might be enough. And I say might be enough because in some cases, you might always have to give them something. And like, I say this for ourselves too. Who works for a pat on the back, right? Like, I mean, yes, it's great that your boss or supervisor can acknowledge you for the first little bit, but eventually that paycheck's got to come in, right? So yes, words can be great, but there's also still got to be a backup. Now, in the beginning, we give them more reinforcement, and there should always be a plan to fade that to something more natural and something more sustainable over time. I say to parents, you don't have to give them, like in IBI, we were known to be very stingy. Like, I mean, I'd take an M&M and cut it up into 4 pieces and give that child a little tiny bit. So I would always say to the parents, like, we're not going through bags of candy with your child. It's probably what they're going to eat anyways. We're just going to spread it out and then make it sustainable over time.
Right. And we've talked a lot about this because I think this is important. I sometimes think that rewards have to be instant. In other words, in a lot of times, and I've experienced this with my own child. I have personal experience with this. Yeah. Is that he will lose motivation if the reward doesn't come quickly. So if he has to do 5 steps to get a reward, he would rather get the reward at step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, rather than saving it all to the end. Because if, like you said, if he never gets to step 5, he never experiences it, then he just abandons it, right? Then the next time we try again, you're not going to get that same motivation because you need kind of some instant kind of rewards. Yeah. So I like what you said about, some things have to happen quickly. I just wanted to point that out, that that's my personal experience, is that you can't just say, do all these things and then you'll get this. It's like, you got to kind of spread it up a little bit.
Yeah. And that's where I think sometimes these things fall apart, is that we fade too quickly. It becomes an end of day reward. Like, you've got to have a good day before you get this big thing at the end of the day. But that's hard for kids because there's so many little steps and micro things that they did that they were successful at today. And then maybe 1 or 2 things they messed up at and they lose that entire thing. It's like, you have to, and, from a behavioral lens, the quicker and the closer reinforcement comes to the behavior, the stronger that link is going to be. And so you want immediacy. You want to reinforce immediately as much as possible. We introduce things like tokens and check marks to create a bit of a delay, because in some cases, let's say the child's motivated for an iPad. I mean, you can't give them an iPad every single time they do 1 step of an activity, right? Like, put on their jacket, watch an iPad, put on their pants, watch an iPad. So in those cases, you build up to a larger reinforcer, and you use things like a token or a check mark to just buy you some time, but always ensuring that they're successful, that they're going to get to that last step so they contact reinforcement at the end.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. That's good advice. Tell me a little bit about building relationships with children with autism. Sometimes for educators, that can be difficult, especially if the child doesn't like contact, right? Or if they don't necessarily have words yet. How do we build those relationships and that connection with them so that I know that, like we said, we're trying to get children to listen, right? We're trying to get children to comply with a lot of things we ask them to do. And the first thing that you need for compliance is trust, right? If they don't trust you, if you don't have a connection, you're not going to get that compliance. So how do we build that connection with them? How do we build a relationship?
Yeah. And we do this every day in our therapy sessions as well. Even though some of our kids have been with us for 3 or 4 years, it is about building that relationship. And I think some of the ways is just observing, following their lead, because their days are going to be different. Their emotional regulation, what they've experienced coming into the daycare, what the night was, what they're anticipating, what they're anxious about. All of that's going to be different from day to day. And I think it's observing, giving them some space, and then following their lead, and trying your best to kind of enter their world. I think that's the biggest piece. I think instead of trying to pull them into our world, like, hey, come see what I've got, come look at what I've got. It's like, what are you doing? And just following their lead. I love being on the floor with the kids, because you can be silly. It's not silly. It's like just entering their world. Like, hey, you're babbling. We're going to babble with you. You're spinning the wheel and going, wee. I went to see a little one, and he's 2.5 and super interested. It was a puzzle, a round sort of clock puzzle. And I brought it out just because I was like, let's see what he does with it. And he just wanted to spin it. And that was it. He didn't care to put the pieces in. He just wanted to spin this puzzle. And I was like, that's fine. And so we took the pieces out, and he would spin it and spin it. And I just kept going, wee, wee. And then I'd stop it. And then he'd look at me, and I'm like, wee. Like, that was it. I was just looking for that eye contact. And I wasn't looking for eye contact, but I was like, let's create a bit of a contingency. So when you look up at me, I'm going to spin it again. And then he got that real quick. So I'd stop, and then he'd look at me, and I'd spin it again. And then eventually I handed him a piece, and I just helped him put it in. And then we started spinning again. And then I gave him another piece. And so we just kind of built on that activity just organically. And then he was done with the puzzle because he didn't want the interruptions. I'm like, okay, we're not interrupting anymore. And then he was done with the puzzle, and he moved on to something else. And it didn't matter how he played with it, because again, he loved crashing things. So then the next activity was he just wanted to throw it. And I was like, let's do it. Let's crash the item. He loved the sound of things falling. And so entering their world and gaining that kind of trust, where it's like, hey, I'm not trying to stop you from doing what you're doing. I'm not trying to take things away. I'm not trying to redirect you. I'm just here to have fun with you. And we have this saying, they should be running towards you and not away from you. So when we walk into a home, if the kid's like, that's not a good sign. You need to spend some time pairing with them. And we call it pairing in our world, but things should be better with you than without you. And that's where, like the puzzle is boring, but it's more fun with me because I'm spinning it. Now we're spinning this, and this is more fun because you're not able to spin it. I can spin it, and I can spin it faster than you can spin it. So I made this more fun. Bubbles can be more fun with me than if I just gave you a bottle of bubbles, because I can blow them, I can sing with them, I can pop, pop, pop. So making things more fun with you than they are by themselves is a great way to build connection.
I love that. That is some good advice. I love that you said go into their world. A lot of times like you said, we try to pull them into our world instead of really looking at what are they doing and how can I join their play rather than try to change it. Yeah. Love it. Love it. Love it. So we're coming to the end. Unfortunately, I'm going to have you come on again because I'd love to ask you so many more questions. But can we end with this question? If you could give one piece of advice to a parent or an educator who's just starting out on this journey, supporting a child with autism, what would that advice be?
Oh, that's so much. One thing that I see a lot, and because communication is a core deficit for a lot of children with autism, it presents differently for every child. I think one advice I would give parents and educators is understand your child's communication preference and style. And that may not be vocal communication. It may not be speech, but finding what comes naturally to them and build from there. And I find that it's heartbreaking. And it's, as a parent, I can understand if you have a child that's not speaking and you want them to speak. But in my experience, to be very honest, when we make communication easy, as in pointing, pictures, picture exchange, when we make the mode of communication easy, speech can come along. It often does, but we can't make you can't pull words out of their mouth, but we can teach them to point to a picture and get their needs met. We can teach them to gesture or show me what you want. So that's something that I wish I could tell every parent is understand, make communication easy and don't get hung up on the speech part of it. Because that may or may not come along, but if your child can tell you what they want through other means, that's going to make their life easier too, and yours.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Love that. So tell my listeners how they can get in touch with you if they wanted to recommend your services to the parents.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can look us up on our website is www.spokesautismservices.ca. We've got all the information there. There's a contact page as well as my phone number. So that's the best way. You can follow us on Instagram at spokes.autism. And yeah, that would be the best way to reach out to us.
Awesome. Thanks for being here today.
You're welcome.
It was a pleasure.
Yeah, same here. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to the ECE Classroom with Susie Begin. For more information, you can visit our website at www.susiebegin.com. Remember to rate, review, and subscribe to our podcast so you can stay up to date on our latest episodes. Thanks for listening.